The text message arrived at 7:42 on a Friday night, just as I was finishing the second coat of polish on my dress shoes. The notification screen lit up the dark oak of my kitchen table, casting a brief blue glow on my calloused hands. The message was short, polite, and completely devastating. It read, "Dad, I am so sorry to do this, but we need to make a change for tomorrow. Bianca is extremely stressed out. Her family is San Francisco high society, and they are very particular about the guests. They are uncomfortable around working-class people who look like they labor for a living. Bianca thinks your construction worker vibe will embarrass her parents. It is better if you do not attend the ceremony. I will send you photos of the wedding. Love, Tyler." I stared at the screen for a long time. The silence in my kitchen became heavy, almost suffocating. The only smell in the room was the sharp, chemical scent of black wax shoe polish and the faint aroma of sawdust that seemed permanently embedded in the walls of my house. I did not reply. I did not call my son to demand an explanation. I did not scream or throw the shoe polish across the room. At 65 years old, I had learned that when someone shows you who they are, you believe them the first time. If you have ever sacrificed everything for the people you love, only to be cast aside when they no longer need you, you know exactly how that silence feels. My name is Paul Aldridge. I am a retired builder. For 40 years, I lived my life with a sore back and cracked fingers, working under the blazing California sun. I started with a single second-hand shovel and an old pickup truck, pouring concrete driveways and framing small residential homes in Orange County. Over the decades, I built Aldridge Construction into a successful commercial development firm. I retired 4 years ago, shortly after my wife Helen passed away from cancer. The house I live in is a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet suburb. It is fully paid off. I drive a 10-year-old Ford F-150 with a dent in the tailgate. I cut my own grass and clip coupons for groceries. Most people who see me at the local hardware store think I am just an old pensioner living on a tight budget. They do not know that my retirement accounts are in the 7 figures or that I own a portfolio of valuable commercial real estate. I lived simply because that was how Helen and I liked it. We did not need flashy things. But I wanted a different life for our only son, Tyler. I wanted him to have the soft hands of a man who signs the front of a check, not the rough hands of a man who cashes the back of it. I paid for his private schooling, his college tuition, and his living expenses. When he graduated and got a job as a junior real estate broker, I bought him a black BMW M5 so he would look professional for his clients. He told his friends he bought it with his performance bonus, and I let him believe that lie. I even subsidized the rent on his luxury apartment in Newport Beach, paying the property management company through a private holding corporation I owned. I wanted him to feel successful, but in my attempt to shield him from the hard edges of the world, I had accidentally raised a parasite. Then came Bianca Davenport. She was 26, from San Francisco, and carried herself like royalty. She spoke with a soft, breathy accent and wore designer labels that she could not afford. She looked down on everyone. The first time Tyler brought her to my house for dinner, she spent the entire evening looking at her phone, barely touching the pot roast I had spent 4 hours cooking. When she did speak, it was to complain about the traffic or to drop the names of her wealthy friends. Her parents, Charles and Evelyn Davenport, were supposedly old money investors who owned a vineyard in Napa. Tyler was completely blinded by her. He spent his entire salary buying her gifts, dinners, and weekend trips, and when the wedding planning began, Bianca insisted on the Peninsula Beverly Hills. It was a massive luxury event that was supposed to cost upwards of $150,000. Tyler came to me, looking stressed, and asked for help. I agreed to cover the deposits and the final venue fees. I thought I was helping my son build a foundation for his future. I walked over to the kitchen door where my charcoal suit hung. I had bought it 10 years ago for a charity gala, but I had it dry cleaned and pressed just for tomorrow. It looked small and empty hanging there on the hook. I took it down, walked to the hallway closet, and hung it in the very back behind my winter coats. I would not be needing it. I walked back to my desk in the corner of the living room and opened my laptop. My hands were perfectly steady. I was not angry yet. The anger would come later. Right now, I felt only a cold, clinical curiosity. I wanted to see exactly what my working-class money had bought them over the last few weeks. I logged into the business credit card account I had authorized Tyler to use for emergencies. The statement was a catalog of greed. There was a $4,500 charge at a luxury spa in West Hollywood, a $6,200 charge for a designer tuxedo rental and custom tailoring, A $15,000 charge for a private yacht charter for the rehearsal dinner. I had not been invited to the rehearsal dinner either. Tyler had told me it was a small, intimate event for the wedding party only. Now I saw that he had hosted 25 people on a luxury yacht using my company credit card. I scrolled down further, my eyes scanning the pending transactions. That was when I saw it. A notification from the Orange County Recorder's Office. As a property owner, I had signed up for their automatic title monitoring service years ago to protect against title fraud. The alert had arrived at 5 late that evening, but I had been too busy preparing for the wedding to notice it. I clicked on the link. It was a quitclaim deed. It showed that the title to my commercial office building in Newport Beach, a property worth over $2,000, had been transferred from my personal trust to an entity called T&B Holdings LLC. The date of the transfer was Tuesday. The document bore my signature at the bottom, stamped by a mobile notary. My breath caught in my throat. I had never signed any deed. I had never met a notary. I looked at the signature on the scanned document. It was a very good imitation of my handwriting, but the slant was slightly off. The LLC, T&B Holdings, was registered in Delaware. I opened a separate window and searched the state business registry. The authorized managers of T&B Holdings LLC were Tyler Aldridge and Bianca Davenport. I leaned back in my leather chair, the glow of the screen reflecting off my glasses. My son had not just excluded me from his wedding. He and his fiancée had forged my signature, stolen my commercial building, and used the title to secure a $250 hard money construction loan. The first draw of $150,000 was already pending, set to clear in the morning to pay for the final venue costs at the peninsula. They had literally stolen my life's work to pay for a party where I was banned. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the quiet street. The storm was coming, but for the first time in 28 years, I was not going to stand in front of my son to block the wind. I was going to let it hit him. I picked up my phone and dialed Clint Baxter. Clint had been my personal attorney and closest friend since we were both 25, back when we were struggling to buy our first bags of cement. He answered on the third ring, his voice slightly raspy. "Paul, what is going on? Aren't you supposed to be resting up for the big wedding tomorrow?" "Clint," I said, keeping my voice flat, "I need you to open your email right now. I just sent you a PDF from the county recorder's office." I heard the rustle of papers and the click of a computer mouse on the other end of the line. For a full minute, there was only the sound of Clint's heavy breathing. Then he let out a low, sharp whistle. "Paul, what the hell is this?" "This is a quitclaim deed for the Newport Beach building. It says you transferred the property to T&B Holdings LLC on Tuesday." "I never signed it, Clint," I said. "I was at the cardiologist's office in Irvine on Tuesday morning having my annual stress test. You can check my calendar and the doctor's records. That signature is a fake." Clint's tone immediately shifted from friendly to professional. "This is a massive problem, Paul. Under California law, a forged deed is void ab initio. That means it is completely null and void from the very beginning. It has no legal validity and it cannot convey any title. Under California Penal Code Section 470, this is straight-up forgery. And because you turned 65 last month, this falls directly under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15.6 and 9.10.30 for elder financial abuse. Tyler has crossed a line he cannot walk back from." I sat back, looking at the shoe-polished tin on my table. "I know, Clint, and I want to press charges. But first, I want to cut off their oxygen. What happens to the loan they took out?" Clint tapped his pen against his desk. "If the deed is void, the mortgage they secured against it is also invalid. I know the legal counsel for that hard money lender, Apex Capital. I will draft an emergency affidavit of forgery and send it to them first thing in the morning, along with a notice of pending litigation. They will freeze the line of credit immediately. If the lender freezes the funds, that pending draw of $150, Houston to the Peninsula Beverly Hills will bounce. The hotel will not get paid." "Good," I said. "Do it. I want the paperwork ready by 8 a.m. After hanging up with Clint, I turned my attention back to the laptop. I logged into my corporate banking portal. The first thing I did was navigate to the credit card management tab. I looked at Tyler's name under the authorized users. I did not just temporarily lock the card. I clicked the option to report it lost or stolen. When you report a card stolen, the bank's security protocols kick in. They do not just decline the next transaction. They flag the card as a potential criminal instrument and lock the entire sub-account immediately. I clicked confirm. The screen flashed green. The card Tyler was carrying in his pocket, the one he planned to use to pay for the wedding florists and the bar tab tomorrow, was now just a piece of useless black plastic. Next, I looked at the lease agreement for the Newport Beach condo. The luxury two-bedroom apartment was rented under my corporate name, Aldridge Holdings LLC, and I had been paying $30,100 of the $4,500 monthly rent, while Tyler paid only $1,000. The lease agreement explicitly prohibited any unauthorized transfer of rights or illegal activities on the premises. I drafted an email to the property manager, a tough-as-nails woman named Sarah who had worked for me for 10 years. Sarah, I wrote, I am terminating the corporate lease for Unit 4B effective immediately due to tenant fraud. I have authorized a locksmith to meet you at the property at 8:09 a.m. tomorrow to change the locks and secure the premises. Do not allow Tyler or anyone else inside. I hit send. That was the home they planned to return to after their honeymoon. Finally, I called the commercial insurance agent for my company. I instructed them to remove the black BMW M5 from our active corporate fleet policy, effective at midnight. I also filed a repossession request through our corporate vehicle tracking service, listing the car as unauthorized for personal use. In the eyes of the law and the insurance company, Tyler was now driving an uninsured vehicle that belonged to my company, without my permission. By 9 p.m., the digital trap was fully set. I shut down the laptop, closed the lid, and walked into the kitchen to wash my hands. The black polish came off slowly, staining the white porcelain of the sink. My phone began to buzz on the table. The screen showed Tyler's face. He was smiling in the photo, holding up a large fish we had caught off the coast of Catalina 5 years ago. I did not pick it up. I watched it vibrate against the wood until it went silent. A minute later, it buzzed again. This time it was a text. Dad, are you there? I am trying to pay the rehearsal dinner yacht crew their tip and the card is getting declined. The manager says the account is frozen. Please call the bank and fix this. It is embarrassing. I stared at the text. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not mention the text he had sent me hours ago, banning me from the most important day of his life. He only contacted me because the faucet of my money had suddenly run dry. I held the power button on the side of my phone. I held it down until the screen went dark and the power-off slider appeared. I slid it across, putting the phone to sleep. For the first time in 28 years, I walked to my bedroom without worrying about my son's problems. I slept deeply, knowing that when the sun rose, the fantasy my son had built would begin to crumble. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the thick marine layer that rolled in from the Pacific, clinging to the manicured lawns of my neighborhood. It was 7 a.m. on the day my son was supposed to get married. Most fathers in my position would be standing in front of a mirror, carefully tying a Windsor knot, adjusting their cuffs, or rehearsing a speech that would make their son's bride tear up. I was not doing any of those things. I was standing in my front yard, wearing a faded flannel shirt, grease-stained jeans, and a pair of worn-out leather work boots. I pulled the starter cord on my 20-year-old Toro lawnmower. The engine sputtered, gasped, and then roared to life with a loud, mechanical growl that shattered the suburban silence. I pushed the mower in straight, methodical lines across the grass. The smell of gasoline and cut clover filled the air, grounding me. It reminded me of who I was. I was Paul Aldridge. I built things with my own hands. I valued hard work, reliability, and respect. And today, I was going to watch a house of cards fall down. I was halfway through the yard when I heard the screech of tires. It was the unmistakable sound of high-performance rubber being tortured against asphalt. I did not look up immediately. I kept my pace steady, pushing the mower, feeling the vibration in my palms. The black BMW M5 drifted around the corner, traveling way too fast for a residential street, and slammed on its brakes right in front of my driveway. The tires smoked slightly, leaving dark skid marks on the pavement I had sealed myself last summer. The driver's door flew open, and Tyler scrambled out. He looked like a physical wreck. His hair was messy, pointing in random directions, and he was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked nothing like a groom who was hours away from marrying into San Francisco high society. He looked like a boy who had lost his way. The passenger door slammed open next, and Bianca stepped out. She was wearing a designer pink velour tracksuit and giant sunglasses that covered half her face. She slammed the car door so hard the vehicle rocked on its suspension. A sharp pang of annoyance hit me. You do not slam the door of a machine you did not pay for. Bianca marched up the driveway, her heels clicking furiously on the concrete. "Paul!" she shrieked, her voice easily cutting through the rumble of the lawnmower. What the hell is wrong with you? Why is your phone off? I reached down and flipped the kill switch on the Toro. The engine died instantly and the sudden silence felt heavy. I took a slow breath, wiped my brow with a red rag from my back pocket and faced them. I did not say a word. I just stood there, leaning against the mower's handle. Tyler ran up to me, stopping just a few feet away. "Dad," he panted, his chest heaving. "You need to turn your phone on. Do you have any idea what is going on? My cards are frozen, all of them." Bianca pushed past him, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. "Declined," she hissed, shoving her phone screen inches from my face. "Declined, Paul. Do you know what that word means?" I was at the salon in West Hollywood. I had just finished my hair extensions. My hair was wet. When I gave them the corporate card, the machine beeped. It beeped loud, Paul. Everyone in the salon looked at me. The receptionist told me the card was reported stolen. They thought I was a thief. They threatened to call the police. I had to call my mother to pay the bill over the phone. On my wedding day, I folded the red rag and slipped it back into my pocket. "That sounds embarrassing," I said, my voice completely flat. "Embarrassing?" Bianca shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red under her makeup. It was humiliating. "You need to call the bank right now. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you made an error. Fix this." Tyler stepped between us, putting his hands up in a pleading gesture. "Dad, please, we do not have time for a lecture. The florist is refusing to unload the centerpieces at the venue. The limousine service needs the security deposit before they pick up Bianca's parents from the airport. We have vendors calling us every 5 minutes. Just call the bank and unlock the card. We can talk about whatever is bothering you after the ceremony." "Whatever is bothering me." I repeated the words slowly. He thought this was a mood. He thought his father was just having a senior moment, throwing a tantrum because his feelings were hurt. He did not even realize that the earth had split open beneath his feet. I looked at my son. I looked at the panic in his eyes. It was not the panic of a son who was worried about his father's health or why he was cutting the grass in old clothes on his wedding day. It was the raw, naked panic of a user who had suddenly been cut off from his supply. "I am not calling the bank, Tyler," I said. Tyler blinked, his mouth opening and closing. "What? What do you mean?" I said, "I am not calling the bank. The card was not declined by mistake. I reported it stolen because that is exactly what it is. It is stolen property." Bianca let out a shrill laugh that sounded like a bird choking. "You reported it stolen? Why would you do that to your own son?" "Because," I said, looking directly at her, "I realized something last night. I realized that only a thief would take $150,000 from a man's bank account and then send him a text message telling him he is too low class to sit at their table." Tyler's face went completely pale. The reality of the situation finally hit him. The air seemed to leave his lungs. "Dad, come on," he stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You got the text. Look, I am sorry, okay? It is complicated. Bianca's family has expectations. We wanted the day to be perfect. We did not want you to feel out of place." "Out of place," I repeated. "You are standing in the driveway of the house I built. You are driving a $100,000 car I paid cash for. You are wearing clothes bought with my company credit card, and you think I am the one who is out of place." Bianca scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, here we go," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The classic blue-collar pity party. Listen to me, Paul. We do not have time for your fragile ego today. We have guests arriving from Napa and San Francisco in a few hours. We have a strict schedule to keep. You are ruining the most important day of our lives because you got your feelings hurt over a simple request. Just unlock the card, give us the money, and go back to your gardening. You are right anyway. You do not fit in with my family. Look at you. You are covered in grass clippings. You look like the help." I looked down at my work boots, which were stained with oil and dirt. I looked at the faded sleeves of my flannel shirt. Then I looked past Bianca at the black BMW M5 parked on the street. I remembered working a 6-month consulting job after my retirement, consulting on a commercial high-rise foundation in Los Angeles just to pay cash for that car. I had wanted Tyler to have a reliable, safe vehicle that would make him feel confident when meeting wealthy clients. I had put the title and the insurance in my company's name for tax purposes, but I had let him drive it as if it were his own. I had let him pretend he was a big shot. "You know, Bianca," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming very quiet. "You are absolutely right. I am just the help. I am the help that pays for the luxury apartment you live in Newport Beach. I am the help that pays for the designer clothes in your closet. and I am the help that pays for that car you just slammed the door of. I walked past them, stepping off the grass and heading down the driveway toward the street. Where are you going? Tyler called out, his voice rising in panic. Dad, where are you going? We need the car. The groomsmen are waiting at the hotel. We have to pick them up in an hour. I did not answer. I walked up to the BMW M5, ran my hand along the warm hood, and reached into my pocket. I had a key ring with a master key for every company vehicle I owned. I pressed the unlock button. The car's headlights flashed and the side mirrors unfolded. I opened the driver's door and sat inside. The interior smelled like Tyler's expensive cologne and Bianca's heavy perfume. It smelled like entitlement. I inserted the key and started the engine. The 8-cylinder motor roared to life with a deep, throaty growl. "Get out of the car!" Bianca screamed, running down the driveway. Her designer heels clicked frantically on the asphalt as she waved her arms in the air. "That is our car. You cannot take our car." I rolled down the window as Tyler caught up, grabbing the doorframe with white knuckles. "Dad, you cannot do this," he pleaded, tears starting to form in the corners of his eyes. "How are we supposed to get to the venue? How are we supposed to get around?" "I don't know, Tyler," I said, shifting the car into drive. "Maybe you can call Bianca's wealthy father. I am sure he has a spare limousine or a private chauffeur lying around Napa, or you can take the bus. It is very affordable, very blue-collar." I did not wait for him to respond. I stepped on the gas pedal. The BMW surged forward, leaving a small puff of exhaust and the two of them standing in the middle of the street. In the rearview mirror, I watched Tyler stand there with his arms hanging loosely at his sides, looking completely lost. Bianca was throwing her hands in the air, screaming at the empty space where the luxury car had been parked. I drove the BMW around the block, pulled into my backyard alley, and parked it deep inside my detached garage. I pulled the heavy garage door down and locked it with a double padlock. Then, I walked back into my house through the back door, locking the deadbolt behind me. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, and sat down at the table. My hands were shaking slightly. It was not from fear or regret. It was the adrenaline of a man who had spent decades keeping his mouth shut, finally speaking up. I had fired the first shot in this war, but I knew it was far from over. The landline phone on the kitchen wall began to ring. I did not move. I just sat there, taking a slow sip of the hot, bitter coffee. I knew what would happen next. They would try to go back to their apartment in Newport Beach. They would try to regroup, find a way to get cash, or look for credit cards. They had no idea that the locks on that luxury condo were being changed by a professional locksmith at this very moment. The landline stopped ringing, leaving the house in a heavy, cold silence. I stood up and walked to the living room window, parting the blinds slightly. I saw them walking down the street away from my house. They were already arguing. Bianca was shoving Tyler's shoulder and Tyler was waving his hands defensively, trying to grab her arm. They looked small from here, petty, weak, and desperate. They were heading toward the bus stop at the corner. I let the blinds fall back. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the charcoal suit. I laid it on my bed and ran my hands over the fabric. It was high-quality wool, durable and solid, just like me. The game had changed, and they did not even know the rules yet. If I was going to be the villain in their story, I was going to be the best-dressed villain they had ever seen. I needed to prepare. I had a wedding to attend, even if I was not on the guest list. I stood in my bedroom, adjusting the collar of my dry-cleaned shirt. The fabric was stiff, smelling faintly of laundry starch, and the charcoal suit fit my shoulders like a set of heavy armor. I had just finished sliding my leather belt through the loops of my trousers when the pounding on the front door started. It was not a polite knock. It was a frantic, desperate thudding that rattled the glass panes in the hallway. They had not gone to the bus stop after all. They had turned around. They had realized that in a suburban county with no car, no money, and a clock ticking down to their social disaster, they were completely stranded. I walked slowly down the hallway. I did not hurry. I had spent 28 years rushing to fix my son's mistakes, but today I was moving at my own pace. I unlocked the heavy brass deadbolt and pulled the door open. Tyler was standing on the porch, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. Bianca stood behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her pink tracksuit. Against the peeling white paint of my wooden porch railing, she looked like an angry flamingo in a coal mine. "You have to stop this, Dad," Tyler said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You are taking this way too far. It was just a text message. It was just a request. We did not mean to hurt your feelings, but you are acting like a lunatic. Give us the keys to the BMW." Turn the credit cards back on. We have less than an hour before the wedding ceremony starts. I leaned against the door frame, blocking the entrance. He was 28 years old, but in that moment he looked like a toddler throwing a tantrum in a toy store. I am not acting like a lunatic, Tyler, I said, my voice low and calm. I am acting like a businessman who just saved $150,000. Bianca pushed Tyler aside, stepping up onto the porch. Her face was twisted into a sneer that exposed the lines of expensive filler around her mouth. Listen to me, you selfish old man, she spat, her eyes flashing with rage. You think this is a game? You think you can hold us hostage? You are pathetic. This is my wedding day, my day, and you are ruining it because your fragile little ego got bruised by the truth. And what is the truth, Bianca? I asked. The truth is that you are an embarrassment, she screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet street. Look at you. Look at this house. It smells like old grease and sawdust. You wear clothes from a thrift store. You drive a truck that belongs in a junkyard. My parents are sophisticated people. They are flying in from San Francisco. They run in social circles you could not even dream of getting into. Do you really think I want them to see you standing next to us in our wedding photos? Do you think I want to explain to my friends that my father-in-law digs ditches for a living? I stood there and let her words wash over me. They were meant to cut me deep. They were meant to make me feel small, but they did not hurt. They only stripped away the last layer of hesitation I had. They made everything perfectly clear. I don't dig ditches, Bianca, I said, keeping my voice steady. I own the company that digs the ditches, and the company that pours the concrete, and the company that builds the walls. But you never cared about any of that, did you? You only cared about the checkbook. I don't care what you own, she hissed, stepping closer. You are low class, Paul. You always have been. You are cheap. You are tacky. Frankly, we were doing you a favor by inviting you to the wedding at all. But now you are going to fix this. You are going to give us the money because you owe it to Tyler. You owe him a future. I owe him nothing, I said, looking past her at my son. I gave him a life. I gave him an education. I gave him a home. And in return, he gave me a text message telling me to stay away so I wouldn't embarrass his new family. Tyler tried to step in, his voice shaking. Dad, she didn't mean it like that. She is just stressed out because of the vendors. Oh, shut up, Tyler. Bianca snapped, spinning around to glare at him. Stop coddling him. He needs to hear this. She turned back to me, her eyes burning with greed and entitlement. You are going to pay for this wedding, Paul. You are going to pay for every single cent of it. Because if you don't, I will make sure you never see your son again. I will make sure you never see your future grandchildren. I will make sure you die completely alone in this miserable, rotting house and no one will care. I looked at her. I looked at the sheer malice radiating off her. And then, I asked the question that had been keeping me awake last night. Why? I asked. What? She snapped. Why should I pay for a party I am not allowed to attend? Because it is your duty, she yelled. Because that is what parents do. They pay for their children's weddings. No, I said, shaking my head. Parents provide, fools pay, and I am done being a fool. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an older model with a cracked screen and a worn protective case. Bianca looked at it with obvious disdain, as if the device itself were a physical manifestation of my lack of refinement. I unlocked the screen, scrolled through my contacts, and found the name Tony. Tony was the owner of Prestige Limousines, a high-end luxury transport service in Southern California. We had played weekly poker together for the last 20 years, and I had personally backed his business when he was trying to expand his fleet a decade ago. I put the phone on speaker and held it up between us. Bianca's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the business name displayed on the screen. The phone rang once, then twice. Paul. Tony's voice boomed through the tiny speaker. Good to hear from you, my friend. Everything good for the pickup today? Hello, Tony, I said, keeping my eyes locked onto Bianca's face. I am calling about the reservation for the Aldridge wedding, the stretch limousine and the 2 town cars for the airport pickup. Yes, sir, Tony said, his voice professional. My drivers are actually at LAX right now. The flight from San Francisco just landed about 15 minutes ago. They are waiting near the baggage claim area, with signs for Charles and Evelyn Davenport. I watched the color instantly drain from Bianca's cheeks. Her parents, the sophisticated Napa Vineyard owners who looked down on people who worked for a living, were walking out of the terminal right now, expecting a private chauffeur to whisk them away in a luxury vehicle. Tony, I said, there has been a change of plans. What kind of change, Paul? Tony asked, sounding confused. I need you to cancel the service, I said. Cancel all of it. Cancel it? Tony repeated. But Paul, the drivers are already at the airport. The meter is running. I know, Tony. I will pay the cancellation fee myself. Whatever it is, just bill my personal account. But do not pick up those passengers. Paul, are you sure? Tony asked, his tone turning serious. This is the wedding day. I am absolutely sure, Tony. The credit card on file for the incidental charges belongs to my son, and it has been reported stolen. And I am withdrawing my personal guarantee for the contract. Send the drivers home. There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard. All right, Paul, Tony sighed. You are the boss. I will radio the drivers right now and tell them to leave the terminal. I am sorry about the trouble. No trouble at all, Tony. I appreciate it. I will see you at poker next week. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the kitchen. It was not the quiet of a burning fuse. It was the absolute dead silence that follows a massive explosion. Bianca let out a sound that did not even sound human. It was a guttural, high-pitched screech of pure panic. You didn't, she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wild. You didn't just strand my parents at LAX. I did, I said. They are wealthy, sophisticated people, Bianca. I am sure they can figure out how to download an app and call an Uber. Or they can take the metro. The Green Line station is right there. It is very efficient, very working class. My parents do not take public transportation, she screamed, lunging forward as if she wanted to claw my eyes out. Tyler caught her around the waist, holding her back. She struggled against his grip, kicking her heels against the wooden porch, her face red and distorted. You monster, she shrieked. You ruined everything. They are going to be standing on the curb like homeless people. They will hate me. They will hate you. They don't even know me, I said. And judging by how you talk about me, they probably already look down on me anyway. So I have lost absolutely nothing today. Tyler looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. Dad, how could you do this? They are guests. This is humiliating. Humiliating? I repeated, my voice hardening. Humiliating is sitting at your kitchen table, polishing your shoes for a wedding you were told not to attend. Humiliating is realizing your only son is ashamed of the hands that built his life. This isn't humiliation, Tyler. This is an education. Education? Tyler shouted, his voice cracking. You are destroying my life to teach me a lesson? I am destroying the lie you are living, I said. You wanted to play the big shot, Tyler. You wanted to marry the princess. Well, big shots pay their own bills, and princesses do not marry broke men. Bianca stopped struggling. She stood up straight, smoothing down her pink velour jacket. Her face was cold now, her eyes narrowing into slits. Fine, she said, her voice trembling but sharp. Fine. You want to play dirty, Paul? We can play dirty. You think you can starve us out? You think we will come crawling back to you? You are wrong. We don't need you. We have the house in Newport Beach. We have our wedding gifts. We will figure this out. And when we do, you will never see us again. You will never see your grandchildren. You will die alone in this rotting house and no one will care. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. The house in Newport Beach, I said. Yes, the house. Yes, the house, she snapped. Our house. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15 a.m. You might want to head over there, I said. Why? She asked suspiciously. Because at 8 this morning, a locksmith met my property manager at the door. They are changing the locks. Since the lease was in my corporate name, I terminated it. Tyler dropped his hands from Bianca's waist. He looked like he has been shot. His eyes were wide and blank, staring at me as if I were a stranger who had just pulled a weapon. You evicted us? He whispered, his voice barely audible. You locked us out? I did not evict you, Tyler, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I simply stopped providing free luxury housing for people who do not consider me family. You said it yourself, Bianca. I am just a checkbook. Well, the bank is officially closed. Bianca stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water, but no sound came out. The sheer magnitude of what was happening was finally crashing through her thick wall of denial. In the span of 12 hours, their financial fantasy had completely evaporated. They had no wedding venue because the pending $150 Zerozen ACH transfer had been flagged and canceled. They had no limousine service to pick up her parents. They had no credit cards to pay for the last-minute flowers, the cake, or the bar. They had no luxury BMW M5 to drive, and now they had no home to return to. Tyler backed away from me, his feet stumbling on the concrete step of the porch. He looked up at the house he had grown up in, the house where his mother had cooked his meals, where we had celebrated his graduations. Then he looked at me, his father. For the first time in his 28 years of life, I saw real fear in his eyes. It was the terror of a man who realizes he is standing on a trapdoor and the lever has already been pulled. "You are insane," he whispered, shaking his head. "You are actually insane." "Go," I said, pointing my finger toward the street. "Go find your fiancée's parents. Go explain to them why they are standing on the curb at LAX with their luxury luggage. Go find a place to sleep tonight. But get off my property." I stepped back inside my house and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked shut with a solid final sound. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was pounding violently against my ribs. It hurt. God, it hurt. To do that to my own boy, the son I had held in my arms when he was a baby, to see the raw hatred and fear in his eyes. But then I looked down at my hands, the calloused, scarred hands that had spent decades working 12-hour shifts so he could go to private schools and drive luxury cars. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness. They were trembling from a lifetime of stored-up rage. I was done being small so my son could pretend to be big. I was done apologizing for the sweat on my brow. I walked to the living room window and parted the blinds once more. They were running down the driveway now. Tyler was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to call an Uber, but with his personal credit cards frozen, I knew the rideshare app would reject his account the moment he tried to confirm the booking. Bianca was screaming at him, hitting his shoulder with her manicured fist, her pink tracksuit shaking with rage. They looked like two rats on a sinking ship, turning on each other as the water rose. I watched them until they turned the corner and disappeared down the street. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the silence inside my house felt clean now. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy fog had finally cleared from the rooms. I went back to the kitchen, picked up my coffee mug, and finished the last sip. It was cold and bitter. I washed the mug in the sink and placed it in the drying rack. My suit was ready, but the wedding did not start until 2 p.m. I had some time, and I had work to do. I needed to go to the Newport Beach condo. I needed to see what state they had left my property in. And I needed to meet Clint Baxter's property manager, Sarah. I walked out to my Ford F-150, threw my keys in the ignition, and started the engine. The truck grumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I backed out of the driveway, driving past the dark skid marks Tyler's BMW had left on the street. It was a 20-minute drive to the Newport Beach condo. The building was located in a prime spot overlooking the harbor. I had bought the entire building as a foreclosure 5 years ago, restoring it myself and keeping the top floors as high-end rental properties. Tyler and Bianca had been living in Unit 4B. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw Sarah's truck parked out front. Sarah was standing on the walkway, holding a clipboard, talking to a locksmith who was carrying a heavy metal drill. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward them, my work boots crunching on the gravel. "Good morning, Sarah," I said. "Good morning, Paul," she replied, giving me a nod of respect. "We got here at 8 a.m. sharp. The locksmith just finished boring out the old lock cylinder. We are about to open the door. The locksmith turned the screwdriver in the core of the lock. With a sharp metallic crunch, the mechanism gave way, and the heavy oak door of Unit 4B swung open. Sarah stepped back, holding her clipboard. I stepped across the threshold, and the smell hit me first. It was a thick, cloying mixture of expensive, overly sweet vanilla candles, stale champagne, and rotting garbage. It smelled like a party that had gone on for far too long and ended badly. The blinds in the living room were tightly drawn, casting the space in a dim, dusty twilight. I reached out and flipped the light switch on the wall. The light revealed a scene of absolute, casual disrespect. It was not that they had destroyed the apartment in a fit of sudden rage. It was worse. They had treated the home I built with an ongoing, lazy contempt. Designer jackets were thrown carelessly over the backs of chairs. Silk dresses and expensive shoes lay in messy heaps on the hardwood floor. Takeout containers and empty sushi boxes littered the mahogany coffee table, some of them buzzing with small black flies. My boots crunched on something hard as I walked further into the room. I looked down. It was a crystal champagne flute, shattered into dozens of tiny pieces on the floor, never cleaned up. I walked past the mess, my eyes scanning the room. That was when I noticed the walls. There were 2 empty rectangular patches of paint above the sofa. The paint there was slightly brighter and cleaner than the rest of the wall, showing where frames had hung for years. My heart skipped a beat. I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. I turned and ran down the hallway toward the master bedroom. I pushed the door open. Above the bed, the wall was bare. For 3 years, a beautiful landscape painting of a quiet lake cabin had hung there. My late wife, Helen, had painted it during our last summer trip together before she was diagnosed with cancer. It was not a masterpiece that would ever be hung in a famous museum, but to me, it was priceless. It was her soul on canvas. It was the way she saw the light filtering through the pine trees. It was gone. I walked to the dresser, my hands trembling. The small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to Helen sat there. It was open. The velvet lining inside was dusty. I reached in. The pearl necklace I had bought Helen for our 30th anniversary, the one she wore to Tyler's high school graduation, was missing. The gold watch I had given her when Tyler was born was also gone. They had not just been living rent-free. They had not just forged my signature on a deed. They had been selling my wife's memory piece by piece. A wave of pure, white-hot fury washed over me, replacing the cold dread. I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor, searching the dust under the dresser, looking for any clue. I reached my arm under the bed, my fingers brushing against a piece of crumpled paper. I pulled it out and smoothed it onto my knee. It was a receipt. The yellow carbon paper had the logo of Downtown Pawn in gold printed at the top. The date on the receipt was Tuesday afternoon. Items listed: 3 oil paintings, amateur, 1 pearl necklace, 1 gold watch. Total cash payout, $2,200. I stared at the number, $2,200. They had sold 40 years of my marriage, the last physical remnants of my wife's life, for the price of a cheap getaway. They had sold her art and her jewelry, probably to pay for Bianca's custom flower arrangements or the tip for their rehearsal yacht crew. The sadness inside me evaporated. The hesitation I had felt on my porch, the guilt of locking my own son out of his home, was gone. This was no longer just a family dispute about an ungrateful child. This was a crime. This was a betrayal of the dead. I stood up, holding the yellow paper tightly in my fist. I walked out of the bedroom and back to the front door, where Sarah was waiting. "Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but hard as granite, "I need you to lock this door. Nobody comes in, nobody." She looked at my face, saw the expression in my eyes, and immediately nodded. "Yes, Paul, I will make sure of it." I walked out to my truck, pulled my phone out of my pocket, and turned it on. The screen lit up, and immediately, a flurry of missed call notifications and text messages from Tyler began to flood the screen. I ignored all of them. I dialed Clint Baxter's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Paul, Clint here. The affidavit of forgery was delivered to Apex Capital. They froze the loan draw. The Peninsula Beverly Hills has already flagged the payment as failed." "Clint," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I am at the Newport Beach condo. They broke into the locked closet in the master bedroom. They stole Helen's paintings. They stole her pearls and her gold watch. They pawned them on Tuesday. I am holding the receipt." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Clint spoke again, his voice had lost its usual professional neutrality. "Oh, Paul, I am so sorry. Those bastards." "I don't want your sympathy, Clint," I said. "I want a police report. I want to draft a formal criminal complaint for grand theft, burglary, and trafficking in stolen goods." "Paul," Clint said, correcting himself, "are you sure you want to go through with this? If we file this report, Tyler will be facing felony charges. He could go to prison." I looked at the yellow receipt in my hand. My signature was forged, my property was stolen, and my wife's memory was sold for pennies. "He isn't my son right now, Clint," I said. "He is just a thief. Prepare the papers, call the Irvine Police Department, tell them to meet us at the Peninsula Beverly Hills." I drove straight to Downtown Pawn and Gold. The shop was located in a slightly run-down strip mall, its neon sign flickering weakly against the bright morning light. I walked through the door, the bell chiming overhead, and stepped up to the thick, bulletproof glass counter. The owner, a balding man named Sal, looked up from a newspaper. "Can I help you?" Sal asked, his voice flat. I slapped the yellow pawn receipt onto the counter, along with a stack of $100 bills. I did not negotiate. I did not complain about the interest or the legality of accepting stolen property. I just wanted my life back. Sal looked at the receipt, then at my face, and then at the cash. He did not ask any questions. In his line of work, he knew when to remain silent. He disappeared into the back room, and 2 minutes later, he returned carrying a large cardboard box wrapped in bubble wrap. I opened the box. Helen's pearls lay inside, coiled on a piece of velvet. Beside them was the gold watch, its hands still ticking rhythmically, and underneath the jewelry were the 3 oil paintings. I carefully unwrapped the canvas of the lake cabin. I ran my thumb over the dried oil paint, feeling the texture of the brushstrokes my wife had made 20 years ago. The paint was rough, but to my fingers it felt like she was touching my hand. They were safe, they were going home. I carried the box out to my truck, placing it carefully on the passenger seat and buckling the seatbelt around it. I drove back to my house in the quiet suburbs. I went inside, showered, and put on the charcoal suit I had dry cleaned for the wedding. I adjusted my tie in the mirror. I looked old. The wrinkles around my eyes were deeper, and my hair was completely silver. But my posture was straight and my eyes were clear. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a man about to deliver a bill that had been overdue for years. I got back into my Ford F-150. It was 1:15 p.m. The wedding ceremony at the Peninsula Beverly Hills was scheduled to start at 2 p.m. I drove north on the freeway, the truck humming steadily, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles parked along the streets of Beverly Hills. When I arrived at the Peninsula, the valet looked at my 10-year-old Ford F-150 with a mix of surprise and hesitation. I did not wait for him to open the door. I stepped out, handing him a $20 bill. "Keep it close," I said, and walked toward the grand entrance. The lobby of the hotel was magnificent. It was a temple of excess, with marble floors, gold leaf on the ceiling, and massive crystal chandeliers. I walked through the lobby, my polished shoes clicking sharply on the stone. The air conditioning was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of expensive fresh flowers. As I approached the grand ballroom doors, the hotel manager, a man named Henderson, scurried toward me. Henderson was a neat, nervous man in a tailored suit. He recognized me immediately. My development firm had built the commercial plaza next to the hotel, and I was a major shareholder in the partnership that owned the land the hotel sat on. I was for all intents and purposes his landlord. "Mr. Aldridge," Henderson whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I did not expect to see you here today." "Hello, Henderson," I said, stopping in front of him. "I am here for the wedding." Henderson looked extremely uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Mr. Aldridge, we have a situation. The ACH transfer of $150,000 for the venue and catering charges failed this morning. The bank flagged it as unauthorized. We have been trying to contact your son Tyler all morning, but his cards are getting declined too. We were actually preparing to halt the reception." "I know, Henderson," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The transfer was indeed unauthorized. It was fraud." Henderson gasped, looking around the lobby to make sure no guests were listening. "Fraud? But Mr. Aldridge, what should we do? The ceremony is about to start. The guests are already seated in the ballroom." "Let them finish the ceremony, Henderson," I said. "I will cover the costs. I will write a personal check for the full amount right now, but I want a small favor in return." "Anything, Mr. Aldridge," Henderson said, looking relieved. "I want you to let me inside the ballroom before the reception starts. And I want the police officers I requested to be waiting in your office until I give them the signal." Henderson blinked, his face turning pale. "The police? Mr. Aldridge, is someone in danger?" "Only a couple of thieves, Henderson," I said, pulling my checkbook from my jacket pocket. "Now, let's get the paperwork signed." The double doors of the grand ballroom were pushed open, and the sound of a string quartet, playing a soft classical melody, drifted out into the lobby. The ceremony was over. The guests were beginning to stream into the reception area, talking and laughing, holding glasses of champagne. I stood in the deep shadows near the entrance, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket, watching them pass. None of them looked at me. To them, I was just another older gentleman in a dark suit waiting for someone. I walked slowly through the entrance, my footsteps muffled by the thick, plush carpet. The ballroom was breathtaking. It was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, illuminated by massive chandeliers that cast a warm, brilliant glow over the room. The tables were set with fine bone china, heavy silver utensils, and crystal glassware. The centerpieces were towering, elaborate arrangements of white orchids and hydrangeas, the very flowers that had been purchased with the funds stolen from my wife's memory. I stood near the back of the room, behind a pillar, and watched the crowd. There were easily 200 guests. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in expensive designer gowns, people who laughed with their heads thrown back, holding their champagne flutes by the stem. They were the elite of San Francisco and Los Angeles. The social circles Tyler had been so desperate to impress that he was willing to erase his own father to do it. And there, in the center of the room on a raised stage, bathed in a bright spotlight, stood Bianca. She had changed into her wedding dress. It was a masterpiece of white silk and hand-stitched lace, a garment that must have cost thousands of dollars. She held a wireless microphone in her hand, her other hand resting theatrically on Tyler's arm. Tyler stood beside her, looking stiff and uncomfortable in his custom tuxedo, his eyes scanning the floor. Bianca was speaking, her voice echoing softly through the high-quality sound system. Her tone was filled with a practiced, tragic emotion that was so convincing it made my stomach turn. "It is such a tragedy," Bianca was saying, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "We wanted him to be here with us so badly. Tyler is completely heartbroken. But you have to understand that his father has been battling some very difficult, severe personal issues for a long time." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the front tables. I saw Bianca's mother, Evelyn, nodding slowly, a look of faux sadness on her face. "Mental health is such a silent struggle," Bianca continued, her voice trembling slightly. "We tried so hard to get him help. We tried to include him in our lives. But he has become unpredictable. Dangerous, even. For the safety of everyone here today, we had to make the incredibly difficult decision to ask him to stay home, where he is comfortable and safe." "Poor Tyler," a woman at a table near me whispered. "It must be so hard to deal with a crazy father on your wedding day." I stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked into the center aisle of the ballroom. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, steady, and unstoppable momentum of a man who had spent 40 years pouring foundations that could support skyscrapers. The click of my polished leather dress shoes was lost in the carpet, but my presence was not. Tyler was the first to see me. He had been looking toward the back of the room, his eyes scanning the crowd nervously, probably wondering how they were going to pay the hotel bill when the reception ended. When his eyes locked onto me, his face went completely blank. His jaw dropped slightly. The fake sorrow on his face vanished, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, cold panic. He reached out and nudged Bianca's elbow. Bianca stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her voice died in the microphone with a soft hum. She followed Tyler's gaze down the center aisle. When she saw me, the color drained from her face. Her grip on the wireless microphone loosened, and it dipped slightly in her hand. The silence that fell over the ballroom was sudden and absolute. It started at the front tables where the wedding party stood, and it rippled backward through the crowd like a shockwave. Within seconds, every single person in the room had turned their head to see what had stopped the bride's speech. The string quartet at the side of the stage trailed off, their bows slipping across the strings with a faint, dissonant scratch before going silent. I kept walking. I walked past the table where Bianca's parents sat. Her father, Charles, was staring at me with his mouth open, a forkful of salmon hovering halfway to his mouth. Her mother, Evelyn, looked at my charcoal suit with an expression of pure disgust, as if a beggar had just walked onto a private estate. I walked past Tyler's college friends, the ones who drove luxury sports cars bought with their parents' money. They looked at me with curiosity and confusion. "Who is this old man? Is he security? Is he a crasher?" I reached the bottom of the stage. Tyler took a step forward, his hands raised slightly in front of him as if he could physically stop me from climbing the stairs. "Dad," he hissed, his voice trembling and barely audible. "Dad, don't do this. Please, just turn around. We can talk in the lobby. I swear we can talk." I did not look at him. I looked past him, my eyes locked on Bianca. I climbed the steps, 1, 2, 3. I stood on the stage, the bright spotlight hitting me, blindingly hot. I walked up to Bianca. She backed away from me, clutching the microphone to her chest like a shield. She looked at Tyler, then at her parents, her eyes searching for anyone to save her. But nobody moved. She was a prisoner of her own desire to appear perfect. If she screamed or fought me for the microphone, she would look hysterical in front of her high society guests. "Give me the microphone, Bianca," I said. My voice was not amplified, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried all the way to the back rows. Bianca slowly lowered her hands. Her fingers were trembling so violently that she could barely hold the microphone. She looked at Tyler, but Tyler was looking at the floor, his face red and his shoulders hunched. She looked at her parents, but they were frozen in their seats. She realized she had no cards left to play. If she made a scene on stage, she would destroy the elegant, refined image she had spent years constructing. With a stiff, robotic motion, she extended her hand and handed me the wireless microphone. I took it. It was cold and heavy in my palm. It felt like a tool, a solid piece of equipment, and I knew exactly how to use it. I turned to face the grand ballroom. I looked out at the sea of hundreds of strangers who had been judging me based on Bianca's lies. I tapped the microphone twice with my finger. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the high-end sound system, shaking the crystal drops on the chandeliers above. The feedback echoed off the high ceiling, making several guests in the front rows flinch. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice deep, steady, and loud. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to your champagne and salmon. I know you were enjoying the speeches." I paused, letting my voice settle in the room. The acoustics were perfect. "My name is Paul Aldridge," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on the crowd. "I am Tyler's father. And contrary to the tragic story you were just told, I am not battling mental health issues. I am not unstable, and I am certainly not dangerous. Unless you consider telling the truth to be an act of violence." A collective gasp went through the room. People shifted in their gold-painted chairs, murmuring to each other. Several guests leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. This was not the standard, boring wedding toast they had expected. This was real drama, and they were hanging on every word. "The reason I was not sitting in the front row today, where a father belongs, is very simple," I said, my voice carrying clearly to the very back of the ballroom. "I was not invited." The murmuring grew louder. I saw Bianca's mother, Evelyn, close her eyes, her face tight with anger. "Yesterday evening I received a text message from my son," I said. It was a very polite message. It explained that his fiancée, Bianca, felt my presence would make her anxious. It explains that because I spent 40 years of my life working with my hands, pouring concrete and building commercial properties, my construction worker look would embarrass her family. I was told that I was too working class for this event. I looked directly at Charles and Evelyn Davenport. Charles had put his fork down and was staring at his hands. Evelyn was holding her glass of champagne so tightly I thought the stem would snap. "They told me I did not fit in," I said. "They told me I would ruin the aesthetic of their high society wedding. But here is the interesting part. Here is the detail I think you all should know." I reached into the breast pocket of my charcoal suit. I pulled out a folded piece of white paper. I unfolded it slowly, the crinkling sound amplified by the microphone. It was the copy of the $150,000 wire transfer invoice from the Peninsula Beverly Hills, along with the personal check I had just signed in Henderson's office. "Even though I was not good enough to stand in their photos," I said, holding the paper up for the room to see, "I was apparently good enough to pay for it. I paid for the champagne you were drinking. I paid for the salmon you were eating. I paid for the string quartet that was just playing. I paid for the ballroom you were standing in." I looked at Bianca, whose face was now a pale, sweaty mask of terror. She was staring at the check in my hand, knowing that the $150,000 she thought had cleared was actually my personal money saving the event from immediate cancellation. I turned back to the crowd. "I want to tell you about the check I am holding," I said, raising the paper. "This is a personal check for $150,000 written from my personal bank account. I signed it 15 minutes ago in the manager's office. The original payment for this ballroom failed this morning. The hard money loan Tyler and Bianca tried to secure against my property was frozen because it was built on a lie. The Peninsula Beverly Hills was about to shut down this reception. They were going to turn off the lights and ask you all to leave. I paid this bill today not for them, but for my own dignity. I paid it because an Aldridge always pays his debts, even when his son refuses to pay his respect." I turned my head to look at Tyler. He was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face, his forehead resting against his hand. "You wanted a perfect wedding, Tyler," I said, my voice dropping to a lower, colder tone. "You wanted to play the wealthy prince, but you forgot one thing. A prince does not banish the king who built the castle." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room again. The guests looked at Tyler, then at Bianca, then at the check in my hand. The facade was beginning to crack. "I am a simple man," I told the crowd. "I built my life on honesty, on hard work, and on loyalty. I thought I had raised my son to value those same things. I thought I had raised a man, but it seems I was wrong. I raised a boy who is so weak that he is willing to erase his own father just to buy his way into a class that doesn't want him anyway." The room was in absolute chaos. Guests were whispering frantically, pointing at Tyler and shaking their heads. Several people were pulling out their phones, taking photos and recording videos of the stage. Bianca was sobbing loudly now, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking underneath her white lace dress. But I was not finished. The real bill was still to be delivered. "But my son's lack of respect and gratitude is not the worst of it," I said. My voice hardened, the sadness completely disappearing, replaced by the cold, sharp tone of a prosecutor presenting a final piece of evidence. I looked out at the guests, letting the tension in the room build until it was almost unbearable. When I canceled the wire transfer and blocked the credit card yesterday morning, my son and his fiancée did not come to my house to apologize, I said. They did not call to ask for forgiveness. Instead, they drove to the Newport Beach condo, a luxury property that I owned, and let them live in rent-free. They used their keys to enter. They went to the master bedroom, where I kept the personal belongings of my late wife, Helen, and they broke into the locked closet. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Several people shook their heads in disbelief. They stole from me, I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. They stole the paintings my wife painted during her final years on this earth. They stole the pearl necklace I gave her for our 30th anniversary. They stole the gold watch I bought her when Tyler was born. And they stole the diamond engagement ring I proposed to her with in 1982. The ring she wore for 35 years before cancer took her life. I reached into the pocket of my charcoal suit again and pulled out the yellow pawn slip, holding it up high so the entire room could see it. This is a receipt from Downtown Pawn and Gold, I said. It is dated Tuesday afternoon. They took the last physical remnants of a woman who loved them, a woman who sacrificed everything for her son, and they sold them to a pawnbroker. They sold my wife's legacy, her art, her jewelry, and her engagement ring for exactly $2,200. The horror in the ballroom was palpable. It hung in the air like a heavy cloud of smoke. Even the catering staff and the waiters had stopped moving, standing in the aisles with silver trays in their hands, staring up at the stage. This was a violation that every person in the room, no matter their social standing, could understand. It was not just theft, it was a betrayal of the dead. I turned and looked at Bianca. She was backing away from me, her dress catching on the stairs of the stage. "And do you know what they bought with that $200? I asked the room. "Do you know what was so important that they were willing to sell my wife's soul for it?" I walked toward Bianca. She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror, her hands clawing at Tyler's sleeve. But Tyler did not move. He was staring at the floor, his face completely pale. I reached into my pocket one last time and pulled out the small, pink thermal receipt from the bridal boutique on Michigan Avenue. I held it up. "This is a receipt for a cash deposit of $4,500, made yesterday afternoon at the bridal boutique," I said. The final payment required to release Bianca's custom wedding dress from alterations. They did not have the money. Bianca's parents could not pay for it. So they took the $2,200 from the pawn shop, combined it with other cash they had scraped together, and paid for the dress. I pointed my finger directly at the white silk and hand-stitched lace Bianca was wearing. "That dress," I roared, my voice finally cracking with the weight of the emotion I had been holding back. "That dress she is wearing right now was bought with the blood, sweat, and memory of my late wife. You are wearing a costume bought with a stolen legacy, Bianca." The silence that followed was absolute. Bianca looked down at her dress. She stared at the white silk as if it had suddenly turned into a sheet of fire. She tried to take another step back, but she tripped on her long train, stumbling and catching herself on the wooden podium. "Get off of me!" Tyler suddenly hissed. His voice sharp and angry, he shoved Bianca's hand away from his arm. The movement was sudden and violent. The guests gasped. The groom was rejecting the bride at the altar in front of everyone. "You knew!" Bianca shrieked at him, her face red and distorted, mascara running down her cheeks. "You drove the car. You waited in the parking lot outside the pawn shop. Don't you dare act like you didn't know. I did not know you sold the engagement ring," Tyler shouted back, his face turning a deep, angry red. "You told me you only took the old silver and some scrap gold. You told me the ring was safe in the box. You are a liar," she screamed, pointing her finger at his face. "You needed the money just as much as I did. You wanted the yacht. You wanted the champagne." "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through their screaming like a steel blade. The sound of my voice was the only thing that cut through the screaming match on stage. I turned away from Tyler and Bianca, looking down at the front tables. Evelyn Davenport, Bianca's mother, had stood up. Her face was a deep, angry shade of purple, the color of a woman who was used to ordering people around and was suddenly finding herself powerless. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "Officer," she bellowed, her voice screeching through the room, trying to find an authority she no longer possessed. She was looking at the security guards near the ballroom entrance. "Remove this man immediately. He is trespassing. He is harassing my daughter. He is clearly mentally unstable. This is a private family event, and he is completely ruining it." I did not step back. I did not look at the security guards. I knew they would not move. Henderson had already instructed them to stand down. I stepped off the stage, my polished shoes making a solid, heavy sound as I descended the stairs. I walked slowly toward the front table where the Davenport family sat. I stopped right in front of Charles Davenport. I placed my hands on the pristine white tablecloth, leaning in close enough to smell the expensive gin on his breath. "Sit down, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but carrying a weight that made him flinch. Charles blinked, his mouth opening in shock. He looked around the room, expecting someone to support him. "Excuse me," he stammered. I said, "Sit down," I repeated, keeping my eyes locked on his. "Unless you want me to announce to every guest in this room the details of the 3 pending lawsuits for securities fraud against you in San Francisco. Or the fact that your townhouse in Napa was foreclosed on 6 months ago. Or that your bank accounts are currently frozen under a court-ordered bankruptcy protection." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace. "That is a lie," she hissed, her voice cracking. "That is a complete lie." "Is it a lie?" "Evelyn," I asked, turning my gaze to her. "Is it a lie that you maxed out your last credit card just to buy the first-class airline tickets from San Francisco to LAX? Is it a lie that you have been praying your daughter would marry my son because you believed my family was wealthy enough to bail you out of the hole you dug for yourselves?" The ballroom went dead silent once more. The guests who had been whispering about me were now staring at the Davenport family with a new kind of horror. The sophisticated Napa Vineyard old money facade was peeling away right in front of them, revealing the financial rot underneath. I looked at the guests at the neighboring tables. Many of them were Bianca's friends, women she had met in San Francisco, and colleagues from her real estate circle. They were looking at Evelyn and Charles with expressions of absolute shock. The whispers had started up again, but this time they were not about a crazy father. They were about the Davenports' bankruptcy. I looked back at Charles, who was staring at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. "You wanted a wealthy father-in-law to save your family, Charles," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "You thought you could use my son to get to my bank accounts. But you did not realize that I have spent 40 years dealing with subcontractors and developers who tried to hide their debts under shell companies and fake assets. I know how to read a financial statement. I know when a company is a shell, and I know when a family is living on borrowed time and borrowed money. You tried to build a marriage on a foundation of fraud, and you chose the wrong man to finance it." Charles sank slowly back into his chair, his shoulders slumping, his face pale. He looked like a balloon that had just lost all its air. He did not say another word. He knew that if I kept speaking, I could reveal details that would destroy whatever remaining credit and reputation he had in the state of California. Evelyn slowly sat down beside him, her hands shaking as she picked up her champagne glass, trying to take a sip, but her hands were trembling so badly the liquid spilled onto the front of her designer dress. Bianca Davenport let out a strangled cry from the stage. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Stop talking! Get out of here!" I turned back toward the stage. The 2 police officers Henderson had kept in his office were now standing at the double doors of the ballroom. They were walking down the center aisle, their black leather boots making a heavy, rhythmic sound on the carpet. They had handcuffs on their belts, and their faces were completely serious. "We are not finished, Bianca," I said, looking up at her. "Not yet. The bill is finally due." The 2 uniformed police officers reached the bottom of the stage steps. The older officer, a veteran sergeant with gray hair and a face that had seen too much of the ugly side of human nature, looked up at me, then at Tyler and Bianca. "Are you Paul Aldridge?" the sergeant asked, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am," I said, stepping back onto the stage. I reached into my pocket and handed him the documents Clint Baxter had prepared for me. The certified copy of the forged quitclaim deed, the official notice of forgery filed under California Penal Code Section 470, the affidavit of elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions, Code Section 1561030, and the yellow pawn shop receipt listing the stolen jewelry and paintings. "These are the legal documents, Sergeant," I said. "These 2 individuals, Tyler Aldridge and Bianca Davenport, forged my signature to transfer my commercial office building in Newport Beach to an LLC they controlled. They then used that forged title to secure a $250,000 loan. Furthermore, they broke into my locked closet in Newport Beach and stole over $50,000 worth of my late wife's personal jewelry and paintings, pawning them to pay for the final venue and dress costs." The sergeant took the papers, scanning them quickly. He looked at the dates, the signatures, and the LLC registration document. Then he looked at Tyler and Bianca. Tyler Aldridge and Bianca Davenport? The sergeant called out. Tyler did not answer. He was shaking, his face completely white, his hands clutching the sides of his trousers. Bianca backed away, shaking her head frantically. No, she whispered. No, this is a mistake. He is lying. He is just a bitter old man. We did not steal anything. The sergeant climbed the stage steps, followed closely by his partner. He reached into his belt and pulled out a pair of metal handcuffs. Tyler Aldridge, Bianca Davenport, you are both under arrest for forgery, elder financial abuse, and grand theft, the sergeant said, his voice loud and official. Put your hands behind your backs. The sharp, metallic sound of the handcuffs clicking open echoed through the silent ballroom. It was a cold, final sound. Tyler's knees completely gave out. He collapsed onto the wooden stage floor, sobbing hysterically. The custom tuxedo trousers bunched up around his knees as he buried his face in his hands. Dad, he screamed, his voice cracking, filled with a high-pitched terror. Dad, please, not here, don't do this to me. Not in front of everyone. Please tell them to stop. I am sorry. I will pay you back. I will do whatever you want. Stand up, son, the sergeant's partner said, grabbing Tyler by the shoulder of his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulling him roughly to his feet. Put your hands behind your back. Tyler looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, filled with tears. Dad, please. You can't do this to your own son. I am your boy. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders when he was a toddler, the boy I had taught to fish, to drive, and to be a man. And I realized that by protecting him from every consequence of his actions for 28 years, I had not been a good father. I had raised a criminal. You cannot pay me back, Tyler, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The engagement ring is gone. The trust is gone. You are on your own now. The officer spun Tyler around and pulled his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sharp, heavy ratchet sound. Tyler let out a pathetic, choked sob, his head slumping forward against his chest. Bianca, seeing the handcuffs on Tyler, panicked. She spun around, trying to run toward the back of the stage, but the heavy 10-foot silk train of her custom wedding dress bunched around her ankles. She tripped, falling hard onto the wooden stage floor, her hands reaching out to catch herself. The second officer stepped forward, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her to her feet. She began to fight, kicking her designer heels against the floor, scratching at the officer's sleeves. Get off of me, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the ballroom. My dress! You are ruining my dress! This is a custom designer gown. It costs thousands of dollars. It is not your dress, Bianca, the officer said, pulling her hands behind her back and clicking the handcuffs shut around her wrists. It was bought with stolen money. It is evidence now. She stood there, her chest heaving, her expensive makeup smeared with tears and mascara, looking out at the front tables. Daddy, she cried, her voice cracking with terror. Daddy, help me, do something. Call the governor, call our lawyers. Charles Davenport sat at his table staring down at the white tablecloth. He did not move. He did not look at his daughter. He knew that if the police looked too closely at his family's finances, he would be joining her in a cell. He picked up his white linen napkin, dabbed at his mouth, and remained completely silent. The police officers did not waste any time. The sergeant grabbed Tyler by the arm, and his partner held Bianca's cuffed hands, guiding them down the stage steps. The walk of shame began. They were led down the wide center aisle of the grand ballroom, the very path Bianca had walked just an hour ago, with a smile of triumph on her face, expecting to be crowned as the new princess of Newport Beach. The guests parted in absolute silence, pressing themselves against the gold-painted chairs to avoid touching them. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached out a hand. The only sound in the massive room was the soft shuffling noise of Tyler's patent leather loafers and the scraping sound of Bianca's heels. Her long white silk train swept the floor, collecting dust and dirt from the carpet, a symbol of purity dragged through the mud of their own making. I stood on the stage completely alone. The spotlight was still on me, hot and blinding, but I did not feel the heat. I looked out at the room. Hundreds of wealthy, sophisticated people were staring up at me, waiting for me to say something else. They wanted an apology. They wanted me to explain. They wanted some sign of weakness or regret. But I had nothing left to say to them. I looked at Henderson, the hotel manager, who was standing near the double doors, with his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Clear the room, Henderson, I said, my voice echoing flatly in the silence. The party is over. Henderson nodded quickly, signaling to the security guards and the catering staff. Yes, Mr. Aldridge, immediately. I walked down the steps of the stage, my shoes making a dull thud on the wood. I did not look at the empty space where my son had stood. I did not look at Evelyn Davenport, who was sobbing quietly into her linen napkin, or Charles, who was still staring at the white tablecloth as if he could disappear into it. I walked down the center aisle, my head held high, my posture straight. My footsteps felt heavy, and I felt older than my 65 years. But underneath the exhaustion, I felt a clean, quiet lightness. The weight of the lies, the weight of the endless demands for money, and the weight of the disappointment, it was all gone. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the ballroom and walked out into the cool, marble lobby. I did not look back. I walked through the grand entrance, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. The driveway of the Peninsula Beverly Hills was filled with police cars. Their red and blue emergency lights flashed silently against the polished limestone facade of the hotel, casting a colorful glare over the valet stand. The valet driver stood in a line, watching as the officers led my son toward the back of a black and white cruiser. Tyler saw me as he was being guided into the back seat. "Dad!" he yelled, his voice muffled by the glass window. "Dad, please!" I did not stop. I did not look at his face. I walked straight to my Ford F-150, which the valet had parked close to the entrance. I opened the door, climbed inside the high cab, and threw my keys in the ignition. The V8 engine roared to life, a loud, honest, mechanical rumble that drowned out the sound of the police sirens. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I knew what was behind me, a complete disaster, a family ruined by greed and pride. But in front of me, the open road lay clear under the California sun. And for the first time in a very long time, I was driving alone. I looked at the cardboard box sitting on the passenger seat next to me. The seatbelt was still buckled tightly around it. I reached over, my fingers touching the rough canvas of the lake cabin painting through the bubble wrap. I felt a deep, quiet connection to Helen in that moment. I had spent 28 years trying to give our son a perfect life, a life free of the struggles we had faced when we were young. I had thought I was doing the right thing. But sitting in the quiet cab of my truck, watching the traffic crawl along the Pacific Coast Highway, I realized that by shielding Tyler from the struggle, I had also shielded him from the character that only comes from work. I had raised a boy who thought the world owed him a stage, and he had stolen from his own mother to buy it. I drove south, away from Beverly Hills, away from the luxury hotels and the fake accents. I drove toward the coast. I needed to think, and I needed to see Clint Baxter. The real battle was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Tyler and Bianca were currently being transported to the Irvine Police Department booking facility. They would be held there until their arraignment hearing in the morning. I took the freeway all the way back to Orange County. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting a long golden light over the water of the Newport Harbor. As I pulled my truck up to the curb, I killed the engine. The silence that followed was peaceful. It was the quiet of a house that had been cleared of clutter. I sat there for a few minutes, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I looked at the box on the passenger seat. Helen's paintings were safe inside. Her pearls and her gold watch were safe. The thieves were in handcuffs, and the property was secure. I had done what was necessary. I picked up the box, stepped out of the truck, and walked toward Clint Baxter's office building. The fluorescent lights of the Irvine Police Department interview room hummed with a flat, buzzing sound that seemed to drill straight into my skull. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the string quartet, the gold leaf, and the crystal chandeliers of the Peninsula Beverly Hills. Here, there was no champagne. There were no white orchids. There were only gray cinder block walls, a heavy metal table bolted to the concrete floor, and the sharp, chemical smell of industrial floor cleaner trying to cover up the scent of fear and sweat. I sat on a cold metal chair, my hands folded on the table. I was still wearing my charcoal suit, though my tie was loosened. I watched the heavy steel door. When the guard finally opened it and led Tyler inside, I almost did not recognize my own son. The $6,200 tailored tuxedo he had put on that morning was now a wrinkled, stained mess. The collar of his white shirt was unbuttoned, his silk bow tie was missing, and there were dark sweat stains under his arms. His face was blotchy and red, and his eyes were swollen and bloodshot from hours of crying. He was not walking like the proud, successful real estate broker he pretended to be. He was shuffling, his shoulders hunched forward as if he were trying to make himself small enough to disappear. The guard guided him to the seat opposite me, pulling a heavy metal chain from his belt and shackling Tyler's wrist to the steel loop welded to the center of the table. The metallic clinking sound was incredibly loud in the small, closed room. The guard stepped back, standing near the door with his hands on his belt. Tyler looked up. When his eyes met mine, his face completely crumpled. He looked like he was 5 years old again, standing on the sidewalk after falling off his bicycle. "Dad," he choked out, his voice hoarse and cracking. "Oh God, Dad, thank you for coming. Please, you have to get me out of here. It is a nightmare. There is a man in the holding cell next to me who has been screaming at the wall for 3 hours. I cannot stay here, Dad. I cannot survive in a place like this." I did not say anything. I did not move. I just sat there, looking at him. I looked for the arrogance he had shown me in my driveway this morning. I looked for the sneer Bianca had worn when she called me the help. It had all vanished. The moment the steel handcuffs had clicked shut around his wrists at the altar, the illusion of their high society life had shattered. "Dad!" Tyler said, leaning forward as far as the heavy chain would allow, his knuckles white against the metal table. "You have to post bail. The lawyer Clint sent said the judge will set the bail amount at the arraignment hearing tomorrow morning. Just pay it. Please, I will pay you back every single cent. I swear to you. I will get a second job. I will do whatever you want. Just get me out of this cell." I leaned back, the metal chair scraping slightly against the concrete. I am not here to bail you out, Tyler," I said, my voice quiet and flat. Tyler blinked, his eyes widening in confusion. What do you mean? You have the money. It's just a deposit. You have to. I am here to tell you that I am leaving," I said. "I am here to say goodbye." "Goodbye," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "Dad, what are you talking about? You cannot leave me here. I am your son. It was not my fault." I looked at him, waiting. "It was Bianca," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of desperate panic. "You know how she is, Dad. She is completely obsessed with image. She pressured me. She said we needed the Napa money. She said her parents were going to buy us a house if we threw a big wedding. She said you had millions of dollars and that you would never even notice the Newport Beach building was gone. She said the paintings were just old amateur junk that you kept in a closet." I tried to stop her, Dad. I swear to God I did. I told her it was wrong, but she would not listen. She made me sign the papers. I listened to him speak, my chest tightening with a deep, hollow disgust. The woman he had stood at the altar with, the woman he had promised to love and cherish in front of hundreds of people just hours ago, was now nothing more than a shield to him. He was throwing his new wife under the bus without a second thought, willing to sacrifice her just to save his own skin. It was the most cowardly thing I had ever seen. "Stop, Tyler," I said. He stopped, his mouth open, his chest heaving as he stared at me. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "You are a grown man. You are 28 years old. And you are sitting in a police station telling me that a girl made you forge your father's signature. You are telling me that you have no spine, no honor, and no character." "I loved her," he whispered, his head slumping down. "You did not love her, Tyler," I said. "You loved the way she made you look to your friends. You loved the illusion of wealth. And you loved my bank accounts because they let you buy her attention. But love isn't theft, Tyler. And marriage is not a conspiracy to commit grand larceny." Tyler buried his face in his cuffed hands, his shoulders shaking as he sobbed. "I am sorry, Dad," he wept. "I am so sorry. I messed up. I know I messed up. But prison? Dad, please, you cannot let them send me to prison. I am not built for a place like that. I won't survive." He was right. He was not built for it. He was soft, doughy, and weak. He had never had to fight for anything in his life because I had fought every single one of his battles for him. I had paved the road of his life so smooth that he had never learned how to walk on gravel. And that was my fault. That was the one crime I was guilty of. "That is exactly why you need to stay here, Tyler," I said. He looked up, tears dripping off his chin, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and desperation. "Why are you doing this to me? Do you hate me?" "I don't hate you, Tyler," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "I love you. That is the tragedy of all of this. I love you enough to let you fall." I stood up, the metal chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. I looked down at my son. "For 28 years I protected you," I said. "I shielded you from every consequence. I paid your credit card debts. I paid for your car. I paid your rent. I fixed your mistakes before you even had to face them. And look what that protection created. It created a thief. It created a liar. It created a man who was willing to sell the very ring I proposed to his mother with, just to buy a centerpiece for a party. Dad, please, I am doing you a favor, Tyler," I said, buttoning my suit jacket. "I am giving you the one thing I never had the courage to give you before. I am giving you reality. The safety net is officially gone. There is no checkbook coming to save the day in the morning. There is just you, your actions, and the law. Tyler stared at me, his face blank with terror, realizing that his words were no longer working. The old man who had always written the check was truly gone. But what about Bianca? He wailed, pulling at the chain around his wrist. What is going on with her? Bianca's in the female holding cell block down the hall, I said, and if she is smart, she is currently sitting there blaming everything on you to her lawyers, just like you just blamed everything on her. You two deserve each other. I turned my back on him and walked toward the heavy steel door. I raised my hand and knocked twice on the small window. "Dad!" Tyler screamed, his voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "Dad, wait! Don't walk away, please! I am scared! I am so scared!" I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. The guard turned the key from the outside, and the door swung open, revealing the bright, sterile hallway of the booking facility. I looked back over my shoulder at my son one last time. He looked so small, chained to that metal table in his ruined tuxedo. "You should be scared, Tyler," I said. "Growing up is a terrifying thing. But it is the only way you are going to survive." I stepped out into the hallway. The guard stepped inside, and the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me with a loud, metallic thud, cutting off Tyler's screams. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, listening to the silence. It was heavy. It was painful. It felt like I had just amputated my own arm. But underneath the pain, I knew it was the only way to save what was left of his character. I walked down the long corridor, past the booking desk where officers were typing reports, and past the glass windows of the lobby. I walked out of the police station and into the cool California night air. The city of Irvine was alive with headlights and distant sirens. The world was still turning, completely indifferent to the collapse of my family. I climbed into my Ford F-150. I sat there in the dark cab for a long time, my hands resting on the cold steering wheel. I had lost my son today, but maybe, just maybe, in a few years when he walked out of those prison gates, a real man would walk out in his place. And if that happened, it would be worth every single cent of the $150,000 I had spent. I started the engine and drove away from the precinct, leaving my boy behind to learn the hardest lesson of his life. School was officially in session. I drove toward the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean a vast, dark expanse to my right. The headlights of oncoming cars swept over the dashboard, illuminating the empty passenger seat where the cardboard box had been. I had left Helen's paintings and jewelry in the secure vault of Clint's office, but the space next to me still felt full of her memory. I could almost hear her voice in the quiet rustle of the truck's air vents. She would have been heartbroken, yes, but she would have supported me. She had always been the stronger one, the one who warned me that I was spoiling Tyler. I had always thought I was expressing my love by giving him everything. Now, looking at the dark coastline, I understood that the greatest expression of love is sometimes a boundary. It took 30 days to clean the debris of betrayal from my life. 30 days of quiet morning coffee, meetings with lawyers, signing official court documents, and living in complete silence. At first, the silence was the hardest part. For decades, my life had been a constant flurry of phone calls, texts, and alarms. I was always rushing to fix a broken water heater at Tyler's apartment, paying off a credit card bill he had run up, or dealing with some emergency he had created. For the first week, I checked my phone screen every 10 minutes out of habit, expecting a message, but by the second week, I stopped checking. By the third week, I realized that the silence was not emptiness. It was peace. The legal process was swift. Tyler and Bianca Davenport were facing multiple felony charges, including forgery under California Penal Code Section 470 and elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 156 Season 2030. The evidence Clint Baxter and I had compiled was airtight. Confronted with the notary's testimony, the county recorder's records, and the yellow pawn slip bearing their signatures, their defense lawyers immediately advised them to take a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentences. Tyler accepted a plea bargain of 2 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Because he had no prior criminal record, he was sent to a minimum security facility in Southern California. Bianca, who was found to be the mastermind behind the forgery and had previously used fake identities to secure leases in San Francisco, was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. The court also ordered full restitution of the $200 pawn value and court costs. I did not attend their sentencing hearings. I had already said my goodbyes in the interview room. I went back to downtown Pawn and Gold on the Monday after the arrests. I had already retrieved Helen's jewelry and paintings, but I went back to finalize the legal paperwork with the Irvine police detectives. Sal, the pawnbroker, looked at me with a mixture of respect and fear when I walked in. He had seen the news reports. Everyone in the city had seen the story of the father who had arrested his own son at the altar. I took Helen's oil paintings back to my house. I hung the canvas of the lake cabin in the living room, right above the fireplace where the light from the window would hit it during the golden hour. I ran my fingers over the rough brushstrokes one last time. They were home, but I did not keep the rest of the jewelry. I did not want my house to become a museum of memories. I kept the engagement ring, locking it in my personal safe, but I took the pearl necklace and the gold watch to a high-end auction house in Beverly Hills. I sold the Newport Beach condo 3 weeks later. The property manager, Sarah, listed it on the market, and within 48 hours we had multiple offers. But I did not sell it to the highest bidder, a corporate investment firm that wanted to turn it into a vacation rental. I sold it to a young local couple, a firefighter and a middle school teacher. They walked through the front door, looked at the view of the harbor, and held hands, their faces lighting up with a quiet joy. The husband had thick calluses on his palms, the hands of a man who worked for a living. I sold the property to them for 15% under the market value. The young firefighter had looked at me with tears in his eyes when we signed the final paperwork at Clint's office. He told me they had been trying to buy a home in Orange County for 2 years, but they were constantly outbid by cash investors. He said my discount was a miracle for them. I shook his hand, feeling the rough texture of his skin. "You earned it, son," I told him. "Keep your hands dirty and your head high. That is all the payment I need." Watching them walk out of the office, I knew Helen would have smiled. She had always believed in helping people who were willing to sweat for their dreams. We had started our own lives with nothing but a toolbox and a dream, and it felt right to pass that opportunity on to the next generation of builders. When the check for the condo cleared and the auction house wired the funds for the jewelry, I took every single cent, amounting to over $1,200,000, and opened a new endowment fund at the local community college. I named it the Helen Aldridge Scholarship Fund. It was not for students going to Ivy League universities or business schools. It was designed specifically for young men and women who wanted to go to trade schools. It paid the tuition for kids who wanted to learn how to weld, how to plumb, how to lay brick, and how to build things that lasted. It was the best investment I had ever made. I had spent 28 years funding a son who built his life on sand. Now, I was funding kids who were learning how to build on solid rock. I sat in my Ford F-150, looking at the community college campus through the windshield. The sun was warm and the air was clear. I felt a deep, quiet sense of accomplishment. I had done my job, I had provided, I had built, and when the foundation had cracked, I had corrected it. The rest was up to Tyler. Now I sat in seat 1A of a Boeing 777. The leather was soft, much slower than the worn bench seat of my Ford F-150. The air in the cabin smelled faintly of conditioned oxygen and expensive cologne. The flight attendant, a young woman with a polite, professional smile, leaned over my seat, holding a bottle wrapped in a white linen napkin. "Mr. Aldridge," she asked, "would you like a glass of champagne before we take off?" I looked at the label on the bottle, Dom Perignon. It was the exact same vintage that Tyler had charged to my business credit card for his wedding reception, the same champagne that had been left behind in the silent ballroom when the police led him away. "Yes," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "I would love one." She poured the pale golden liquid into a thin crystal flute. The bubbles danced, rising rapidly to the surface in a frantic race to be free. I took the glass. It felt light and delicate in my calloused hand. I took a slow sip. It was cold, crisp, and slightly dry. It tasted like victory. Not the kind of victory where you defeat an enemy, but the quiet, profound victory of reclaiming your own life. I looked out the window of the airplane. The tarmac below was busy with activity. Baggage carts were driving back and forth, fuel trucks were pumping gas into the wings, and men in neon yellow vests were directing the giant machines under the bright California sun. They were doing the hard, physical labor that kept the world moving. They were people like me, people who worked with their hands and took pride in their craft. Beyond the airport, the sprawl of Los Angeles stretched out toward the ocean, a grid of gray concrete and green trees. Somewhere down there, in a minimum security facility, in the desert, my son was sitting in a cell. He was probably wearing a prison-issued uniform, learning how to sweep a floor, how to make his own bed, and how to follow orders. He was learning that actions have mass and velocity. He was learning that the world does not owe him a check. I did not feel anger toward him anymore. The rage that had fueled me on the day of the wedding had burned itself out, leaving behind only a clean, quiet slate. I had done my duty. I had raised him, provided for him, and when he went astray, I had corrected him. The rest was up to him. He would have to decide what kind of man walked out of those gates in 2 years. The plane began to push back from the gate, the low hum of the tug vibrating through the floorboards. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I looked at the screen. There were no missed calls. There were no urgent text messages asking for money. There were no notifications about maxed-out credit cards or late rent. It was completely silent. I held the power button on the side of the phone. The screen went dark, and I held it until the little white spinning wheel disappeared. I slipped the phone into my travel bag, zipped it shut, and stowed it under the seat in front of me. I would not be needing it for a while. I was going to Italy. Helen had always wanted to go to the Amalfi Coast. She had spent hours looking at travel magazines, talking about the way the light hit the blue water of the Mediterranean, and promising herself that she would paint it one day. We never went. I was always too busy working, always building the company, always trying to secure the next commercial contract so Tyler would have a massive inheritance. I had spent 35 years building an empire for a son who was ashamed of the hands that built it. Well, I was going now. I was going to sit on a balcony overlooking the sea. I was going to eat fresh pasta, drink red wine, and watch the waves crash against the cliffs. I was going to sleep in until noon if I felt like it. I was going to spend my money on memories that I could keep instead of financing a fantasy for people who did not respect me. The engines of the Boeing 777 whined, spinning up to a deep, powerful roar as the plane taxied toward the runway. The pilot came over the intercom, announcing our flight path to Rome. I leaned my head back against the plush headrest, closing my eyes. For 65 years, I had been Paul the builder, Paul the husband, Paul the father, and Paul the bank account. Today, I was just Paul. The engines roared to full power, a massive force pushing me back into my seat. The plane gathered speed, the bumps of the runway smoothing out as the tires left the asphalt. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. The tarmac fell away, and the sprawling city below began to shrink, disappearing beneath a thick layer of white, fluffy clouds. The sun shone brilliantly on top of the clouds, a blinding golden light. I raised my glass of champagne toward the empty seat next to me. "Here's to you, Helen," I whispered, "and here's to me." I took a drink, the cold bubbles tickling my throat as the plane climbed higher into the clean, open sky. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the sky outside turned a deep, dark indigo, peppered with a million cold stars. The cabin lights were dimmed, and the other passengers in first class had either fallen asleep or were silently watching movies on their screens. I remained awake, staring out the double-paned window at the empty blackness. I took a slow sip of my water, my mind drifting back over the 65 years of my life. I thought about the early days. I thought about the first summer Helen and I were married. We lived in a tiny apartment in Anaheim, above a bakery that smelled of warm bread every morning at 4 a.m. We had nothing. I had a metal toolbox with a few worn-out hand saws, a hammer, and a level. Helen worked as a receptionist at a dentist's office, and in her spare time she painted on small pieces of cardboard because we could not afford proper canvases. But we were happy. We had a clean, simple pride. We knew the value of every single dollar we earned because we had to sweat for it. When we finally saved enough money to buy our first house, a small fixer-upper with dry rot in the joists, we celebrated with a cheap six-pack of beer on the living room floor. When Tyler was born, I promised myself that he would never have to struggle the way we did. I wanted his path to be smooth. I did not want him to know the anxiety of having only $10 left in his checking account on a Tuesday night. I did not want him to have to work 80-hour weeks just to pay the rent. So I built the company. I took on larger commercial contracts, spent weeks traveling to job sites, and worked myself to the bone. Aldridge Construction grew from a small crew of 3 men into a major firm. The money started flowing in, and with the money came the pampering. I bought Tyler the best clothes. I sent him to elite private schools where the tuition cost more than my first 3 years of business revenue combined. I bought him his first car, and then the luxury BMW M5 when he wanted to look successful. Every time he asked for money, I wrote the check. I told myself I was expressing my love. I told myself I was being a good father, a provider. But looking back now, in the quiet cabin of this airplane, I understand the truth. I had not been a good father. I had been a weak one. By shielding my son from the rain, I had never allowed him to develop the roots required to stand in a storm. By giving him everything he wanted, I had taught him that the world was a grocery store where everything was free and that I was just the shopping cart. I had taught him to value the label on his suit rather than the character of the man wearing it. I had taught him to be ashamed of the calloused hands that had paid for his privilege. We spend our lives trying to give our children the things we never had, I realized. But in the process, we often forget to give them what they actually need: character. I had tried to buy my son's love and respect with a checkbook, and all it had done was turn him into a thief. He had forged my signature, stolen my commercial building, and sold his own mother's engagement ring, the ring she wore when she was dying in that hospital bed, all to buy a fancy dress and a luxury ballroom for a crowd of strangers who did not care about him. It was a tragedy of my own making, but the lesson had finally been delivered. Tyler was in a prison cell now. He would have to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. He would have to work a prison job, earning pennies an hour. He would have to eat whatever food was placed in front of him, and he would have to sleep on a thin mattress in a room with gray concrete walls. He would finally learn what it means to earn his keep. He would finally understand that actions have mass and velocity, and that when you break the law breaks you back. I hoped that the experience would change him. I hoped that the prison walls would strip away the arrogance, the lies, and the entitlement, leaving behind a clean slate. I hoped that when he walked out of those gates in 2 years, a real man would stand in his place. A man who was not ashamed of work, a man who respected his parents, and a man who understood the value of dignity. True wealth is not the balance in your bank account, I thought, taking a final sip of my water. It is not the name of the designer who made your suit, or the luxury car parked in your driveway. True wealth is the ability to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and respect the person staring back. It is the peace of mind that comes from knowing you have lived your life with honesty, integrity, and self-respect. Never allow anyone, not even your own blood, to treat you like a resource instead of a person. Dignity is the only currency that truly matters in this life, and sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything else, even your own son, just to keep it. I leaned my head against the window, watching the stars fade as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold. The plane was descending now, dropping through the clouds. Below us, the coast of Italy was beginning to appear, a beautiful, rugged landscape of green mountains and blue water. I smiled, a quiet, peaceful smile. I was ready. I was ready to step off the plane, ready to walk down the streets of Rome, and ready to see the Amalfi Coast. I was ready to live the rest of my life for myself, carrying only the memory of Helen and leaving the weight of the past behind. I was finally free.